As the artistic director and chief conductor of the Australian World Orchestra, how have you all been coping?
Well, it's been difficult, of course. It's very difficult across the whole board as far as the arts industry is concerned, not just in classical music, of course, all arts, whether that's film and rock music, you name it. And not just in Australia, but the whole world. The thing about the Australian World Orchestra is we bring all the Australian musicians from around the world together. So we have various hurdles. Most of them, of course, the biggest one is the flights, the airline industry. What's going to happen there, and when are we going to be able to travel again? The quarantine laws in Australia particularly. There aren't that many people who will be able to come in and spend 2 weeks in a hotel prior to doing engagements. So that's going to be tricky. And of course, the cost. Nobody knows what's going to happen with the cost yet. And I heard only the other day that Qantas was thinking about getting international flights back up in July next year. So that's, for everybody, really a disaster.
Yeah,
difficult situation.
Difficult indeed, but you make some really good points because you actually travel between Australia and France. How was the strict lockdown in France?
Well, no, the lockdown in France, I know Melbourne has got it very, very tough. But I don't think it really compares to France. What we had to do there was so complicated and so difficult that even if you went outside to drop off your rubbish and put it in the bin outside, then you had to come back and disinfect everything. All the clothes that you'd worn out just for that 20 seconds had to be washed at 60 degrees. Then you had to have a shower and wash yourself and your hair for 15 minutes in hot water. And it was so complicated. You
spoke about the social distancing, the 1.5 metres, but tell us about the social distancing that you have for the orchestra, because that's double.
Well, they've brought in this rule now for social distancing between certain wind instruments, flutes and clarinets and oboes. I suppose because of the saliva that comes out of the instrument, that they now have to be 3 metres apart from each other. Well, of course, for an orchestra, that is basically impossible. You can't do it. They've got 1.5 metres for a string player, and that's, I suppose, because, again, the string players aren't, the saliva is not going anywhere. But for wind instruments, they've basically made it impossible. It needs to calm down very, very soon, because we all think it's a little bit, it's over the top. It's not necessary, that sort of social distancing. I'm not a doctor, of course, but I am rehearsing the Port Sydney Youth Orchestra at the moment. And all the young musicians there haven't played all year, and that's been very demoralising for them. And we had to cut the whole orchestra down into little chamber groups, because that's all we were allowed. We're not allowed more than 20 people on stage. So we've decided to put on a concert, and we programmed a piece just for winds.
How concerned are you about perhaps, the youth and their choices in remaining in the arts?
Oh, that's a great question. You have to question it, don't you? Because the problem with the COVID virus is that of course, we're all desperate for a vaccine, but nobody knows at this stage when it's going to end. So it's not like we can say, okay, well, next year on June 15th, it all finishes and we all get back to playing. We just don't know. So although, as I was saying before, we have to plan the future, there's no definitive answer to it. And we can't say, well, it's definitely going to go ahead. So everything could get cancelled next year, and then it could get cancelled the year after, and then the year after. We just don't know until this vaccine comes through. Then I suppose if you're a 16-year-old and you're thinking about a couple of possible career choices, what are you going to do? Well, we know for 100% that orchestras aren't hiring at the moment. If anything, they're letting people go. Even in managements, if you went into arts management, they're actually not. They're not hiring. They're getting rid of people. It's becoming harder and harder to think of anyone wanting to become a practicing musician for the foreseeable future.
We've seen some performances adapted to online versions. How did you find that?
Well, okay, so what is the future? If social distancing has to remain, at least for the foreseeable future, if the vaccine isn't found fast enough, even in the next 2 years, we have to perform. People have to perform. What can we do? And orchestras have tried social distancing. The Czech Philharmonic tried to do it with the strings on the stage, all of 1.5 meters apart from each other, the winds up in the organ gallery and the brass all up in the gods, around the place. Very, very difficult. And a nice experiment. The audience, apparently, again, they all have to be socially distanced. It can't really go on like that. We musicians need an outlet. So I can understand, of course, that there are so many of these streaming activities going ahead. But the bottom line is, and I don't know one artist that really wouldn't agree with me, it's all about live. Music needs to be live, and that's the world that we live in.
Alexander Briger, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing many live performances as soon as possible. Take care.
Yeah, we do too. Thanks so much as well for having me, Jane.